Isaiah 53. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness. And when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. I can still remember the day that old Mabel gave birth. I begged Daddy to let me keep one of the lambs from her litter. They were the cutest little things you've ever seen. They wriggled and ran with their lanky legs. They butted heads together and nuzzled their mother every time they smelt milk, which seemed to be all the time. I had to use all of my convincing power. I had to bat my eyelids a gazillion times and do all of my own chores, plus the chores of my little sisters and my big brother, for one whole week. But I finally proved that I was responsible enough to take this lamb as my pet. He finally said yes. Now, call me shallow if you like, but I had to take the cutest one. I mean, come on. He didn't have a spot on him. He was the whitest of white, and his little bleat could make my heart melt in an instant. I called him Basil. We grew to be best friends, Basil and I, over the next 12 months. He followed me everywhere. Everywhere I went, he was right on my trail. I went down the road to my friend Kyla's house, and Basil came too. I'd go to the market, keeping away from the Egyptians, mind you. Mama said they didn't really like us. Anyway, Basil was always with me, hot on my trail. I'd sweep the house, helping Mama, because, she had to be out in the fields with Dad, working for the cruel Egyptians. Maybe that was why. Anyway, Basil was jumping through the pile of dust that I'd just swept up, making my job harder, not that I minded. Or I'd be milking the cow, and Basil would be there running through old Pepper's legs, driving her crazy. It just made me laugh. The thing was, I could tell Basil anything and everything. He'd just look at me with those big, warm, brown eyes, and he'd sit patiently on my lap, and I'd pet him, and I'd complain to him. I'd laugh with him. I'd tease him, or we'd just sit in silence as I played with his soft ears. He didn't boss me around. He didn't leave at the end of a play date. He was just always there. He made me happy. The truth was, he was the only one who saw me take that lady's earring. It happened like this. I was just walking along on the other side of town one day, and Basil, obviously, on my trail. And I was minding my own business when I saw this Egyptian woman doing her laundry, as you do. And I paused for a moment, and I saw something fall from the sheets. She flicked them over into a neat fold, and I saw something fall down, and I couldn't quite make it out, but it looked really shiny, and I don't see many shiny things. So as soon as she disappeared inside, I raced inside, I grabbed it, and I raced back out again, and I grabbed it so tightly it almost made my hand bleed. But it was an earring. I had to rub the dust off between the silver setting and the colourful gem inside, but it was beautiful. I had never held something so valuable like that before, and certainly never worn anything like it. Granted, I have 2 ears and only 1 earring, but I didn't care. Maybe I could just cover the other side with my hair. Kyla would be so jealous. Maybe I shouldn't tell her, though, or wear it for that matter at all, because she'd just ask me where I got it and maybe even tattle due to her wild jealousy. So I kept it. And I kept it a secret. It was so pretty, and I couldn't bring myself to return it to that lady. She was so much older than me, and returning it would only mean admitting it, that I'd stolen. So better she thinks she'd lost it. Later that week, I was in my room, and I was turning the earring over in my hands. I was admiring the way that the light from the window came in and shone, lit it up. And Basil climbed into my lap. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so innocent. And he bleated in my face. For some reason, my heart did a little flip-flop, and it wasn't the good kind. It was the guilty kind. At least I didn't have to worry about Basil telling anyone. Just then I heard Mama call for dinner. Both her and Daddy seemed pretty on edge lately, pretty stressed and worried. A little bit of excitement maybe, but it was kind of weird. A lot of crazy things were going on in Egypt. Thanks to Pharaoh's stubborn heart, Dad was always saying. Over the past couple of weeks, I'd heard them talking about Moses and how he was speaking on our behalf as Hebrews and that soon we were going to be free. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but that's what they were saying. I'd seen the flies and the frogs and the bloody water, all the rest of it, except we were fine where we were living because our God covered us. It was insane. Now, Basil, of course, was clueless to the whole thing. But that night at dinner, Mum and Dad were kind of looking at each other and lots, more than usual. And they were nervous, and I wasn't really quite sure what to make out of it, but every now and then they'd also look at me. And, oh no. What if they knew about the earring? What if they'd found it in my drawer? I'm going to be in big trouble. I started to feel even more guilty about my secret. I found out why they were so nervous after dinner finished. And it was way, way, way worse than I imagined. Now, both Mum and Dad, as soon as dinner was over, they pulled me aside and they told me that Moses had received instruction from God and that the final plague was coming. We'd seen 9 terrible things to ransack Egypt and leave us alone, luckily. But now the 10th and final plague was one that could affect us as Hebrews too, not just the Egyptians, which was weird. I started to get really nervous and wondered if maybe I'd be punished for my crime. Then they explained that not mine, but my big brother's life was in danger. God was going to send an angel to kill all the firstborns of man and animal, and there was only apparently one way to stop it. And that way did not seem fair. Why should Moses' God demand my little Basil? He was only a year old. I couldn't let him be taken away from me and then brutally killed and have his blood smeared on the top and the sides of our doorframe. What kind of solution is that? He's my best friend. I wouldn't let it happen. Daddy tried his best to explain. It had to be Basil because he was the perfect male lamb of Mabel's litter. And apparently Moses told everyone to tell their children that it's the Passover sacrifice. I barely understood the concept of a sacrifice, except that it was something of value given up. The Egyptian gods required their worshippers to make sacrifices too, but they were thoughtless and pagan rituals, Mum said. They never made sense to me at all either. But this request from Moses' God seemed to have meaning behind it, but my confused little heart couldn't stand the thought of Basil having to take the hit for our family, for my brother, and I guess, by extension, me too. It didn't seem fair. Basil didn't deserve to die, but the way my father explained it, It was either him or my big brother. It got me thinking. I thought about my sweet little lamb, Basil, and all the memories that we'd made together. Had been a year after all. I thought about my big brother, who always looked out for me and got me out of trouble more than once. I thought about my secret, that if anyone, I deserve the punishment. My guilt of stealing the earring seems like a small transgression, but if the authorities found out, I'd be beaten for sure. I thought later about the fact that not one Hebrew firstborn, man, boy, or animal, had been killed that night. But every single Egyptian home that didn't have blood on the doorpost faced a tragedy that came from closed ears and stubborn hearts. I thought about that choice again. It was either the perfect lamb or us. About 3,500 years ago, the blood of the lamb displayed on the doorposts of the home saved the lives of thousands of men and boys. Around 1,500 years later, the Lamb of God willingly let his perfect, spotless, sinless life and body be broken on the cross. He gave his blood to be spilled in our place for our transgressions. And so we remember. Jesus set up this celebration and this memorial on the very weekend that the Jewish nation was commemorating the events of that night that the Hebrews faced just before they left the bondage of Egypt. He set it up with his disciples to be the tangible way, something that they could see and touch and do, the way in which we, through these symbols, accept Jesus' death and sacrificial offering as the Lamb of the world, the one that all of those sacrifices pointed to. Now, because his death was once and for all, we believe that we don't have to sacrifice anymore. And by eating that bread that represents his body broken for us, and by drinking the grape juice that represents his blood spilled for us, we are showing our acceptance of his gift of salvation. But we'll get to that soon. Another thing that Jesus did with his disciples that night was something revolutionary. As they walked in with their dirty feet, as we saw in the skit, while they were reclined, they were expecting a servant to come along and wash their feet. But Jesus took up a towel, took off his outer robe, knelt down, and proceeded to wash their disgusting feet in a beautiful act of loving service. My mum shared a poem she found with me a few months ago, and I thought I'd share it with you today before we serve each other. It's called The Touch of the Towel. Jesus, you kneel before me. You remove my shoes, and I am exposed. My feet are grimy, full of calluses and cracks, pungent with sweat and toe jam. I'm embarrassed by them. I pull back, but you reassure. You're not offended. I feel welcome in your hands. Vulnerable, yet safe. The cleansing begins. I see your reflection in the ripples. I see me too. Your water brings truth and life. Who I am and who I can be. I am whole and home in the touch, the towel. You look at my neighbor and hand it to me. The act of washing each other's feet was something that Jesus put in place, not only to show that he himself came to serve, but also to set an example for us to do. And today he's handing you the towel, and he's challenging you to wash your neighbor's feet. Your husband, your wife, your child, perhaps. That person you had a disagreement with, perhaps, over the past week or so. Or your friend. So I want to invite you now to put away yourself and all those awkward feelings or discomfort and grab someone, take them to the outside, and serve them through the basins that the deacons and deaconesses have put out. So we'll have some time now. We'll wash each other's feet. Thanks for leading the way, Dawn. And we'll invite you to pray together, and then we'll come back together, ready for the next part of our service.